Reviving history, restored ruins of Nalanda district, Bihar. The restored ruins of Nalanda district in Bihar, India, are a testament to the rich historical and cultural heritage of the region. Nalanda was once a prominent center of learning and Buddhist scholarship in ancient India, attracting scholars and students from all over the world. Nalanda University, founded in the 5th century CE, was one of the world's first residential universities. It flourished for several centuries and housed thousands of students and renowned scholars. The university complex covered a vast area and included temples, lecture halls, meditation halls, libraries, and living quarters for teachers and students. Over time, Nalanda faced various challenges, including invasions and decline. The university was eventually abandoned and fell into ruin. However, in recent years, efforts have been made to revive and restore the site. The restored ruins of Nalanda district offer visitors a glimpse into the grandeur of the ancient university. The architectural remains showcase the skill and craftsmanship of the era, with intricately carved stone pillars, stupas, and sculptures. The site provides a fascinating insight into the educational, cultural, and religious practices of ancient India. The Nalanda Archaeological Museum, located nearby, houses a collection of artifacts discovered at the site. It displays sculptures, pottery, metal objects, and manuscripts, providing further insights into the history and artistry of the region. The revival of the Nalanda ruins has not only attracted tourists, but also scholars and researchers interested in studying the ancient educational system and Buddhist philosophy. The site has also been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, further highlighting its significance. The restoration and preservation efforts in Nalanda district serve as a reminder of the importance of preserving cultural heritage and reviving historical sites to ensure that future generations can appreciate and learn from the accomplishments of the past. Reviving history, restored ruins of Nalanda district, Bihar. Utilize these keywords to emphasize the restoration and preservation of the ancient ruins in Nalanda district, Bihar. They will help attract viewers interested in history, archaeology, and cultural heritage, highlighting the significance of Nalanda as an important educational and religious center in ancient times. Nalanda Mahavihara. Nalanda ist, Nand, pronounced Nalanda, was a renowned Buddhist Mahavihara great monastery in ancient and medieval Magadha, modern-day Bihar, eastern India. Nalanda is considered to be among the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. It was located near the city of Rajgir, now Rajgir, and about 90 kilometers 56 mi southeast of Pataliputra, now Patna. Operating from 427 until 1197 CE, Nalanda played a vital role in promoting the patronage of arts and academics during the 5th and 6th century CE, a period that has since been described as the Golden Age of India by scholars. Nalanda was established during the Gupta Empire era c. 3rd 6th century CE, and was supported by numerous Indian and Javanese patrons, both Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Nalanda continued to thrive with the support of the rulers of the Pala Empire r. 7,501,161 c. After the fall of the palace, the institution was eventually abandoned. Nalanda may have been attacked and damaged by Muhammad Bakhtiar Khalji c. 1200, but it also managed to remain operational for decades or possibly even centuries following the raids. Over some 750 years, Nalanda's faculty included some of the most revered scholars of Mahayana Buddhism. The curriculum of Nalanda included major Buddhist philosophies like Madhyamaka, Yogacara, and Sarvastivada, as well as other subjects like the Vedas, grammar, medicine, logic, mathematics, astronomy, and alchemy. The university had a renowned library that was a key source for the Sanskrit texts that were transmitted to East Asia by pilgrims like Zunzang and Yijing. Many texts composed at Nalanda played an important role in the development of Mahayana and Vajrayana. They include the works of Dharmakirti, the Bodhisattva Charvita of Shantideva, and the Mahavihara Tantra. The current site of Nalanda is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In 2010, the Government of India passed a resolution to revive the famous university, and a contemporary institute, Nalanda University, was established at Rajgir. It has been listed as an institute of national importance by the Government of India. Location: Nalanda is about 16 kilometers 10 mi north of the city of Rajgir, and about 90 kilometers 56 mi southeast of Patna. Connected via NH 31, 20, and 120 to India's highway network. It is about 80 kilometers 50 mi northeast of Bodh Gaya, another important Buddhist site in Bihar. The Nalanda archaeological site is spread over a large area to the northwest of Bargaon Nalanda village, and is between the historical man-made lakes Gidi, Panashokar, and Indrapuskarani. On the south bank of the Indrapuskarani lake is the Nava Nalanda Mahavihara, a university founded in its memory. Similarly, the southwest bank of the Indrapuskarani lake is Nalanda Open University, the state university named after the ancient Nalanda University. Etymology: Mahavihara Mahavihara is the Sanskrit and Pali term for a great Vira center of learning or Buddhist monastery, and is used to describe a monastic complex of viharas. According to the early 7th century Tang dynasty Chinese pilgrim, Zunzang, the local tradition explains that the name Gand Hindi Magahi came from a Nga serpent deity in Indian religions whose name was Nalanda. He offers an alternate meaning, charity without intermission, from Lambda. However, this split does not mean this. Hiranand Sastri, an archaeologist who headed the excavation of the ruins, attributes the name to the abundance of endless lotus stalks in the area and believes that Nalanda would then represent the giver of lotus stalks. In some Tibetan sources, including the 17th century work of Taranatha, Nalanda is referred to as Nalendra, and is likely synonymous with Nala, Nalaka, Nalakagrama found in Tibetan literature. History: Early history of the city of Nalanda 1-00 BCE 300 CE. Archaeological excavations at sites near Nalanda, such as the Jafardi site, about 3 kilometers away, have yielded black ware and other items. These have been carbon dated to about 1200 BCE. This suggests that the region around Nalanda and Magadha had a human settlement centuries before the birth of the Mahavihara and the Buddha. Early Buddhist texts state that Buddha visited a town near Rajagriha, modern Rajgir, the capital of Magadha, called Nalanda, on his peregrinations. He delivered lectures in a nearby mango grove named Pavaraka, and one of his 2 chief disciples, Shariputra, was born in the area and later attained nirvana there. These Buddhist texts were written down centuries after the death of the Buddha, are not consistent in either the name or the relative locations. For example, texts such as the Mahasudasana Yataka states that Nalaka or Nalakagrama is about a yojana 10 miles from Rajagriha, while texts such as Mahavastu call the place Nalanda Gramaka and place it half a yojana away. A Buddhist text, Nikayam Samgra, does state that Emperor Ashoka established a Vihara monastery at Nalanda. However, archaeological excavations so far have not yielded any monuments from Ashoka period or from another 600 years after his death. Chapter 2.7 of the Jaina text Sutrakritanga states that Nalanda is a suburb of capital Rajagriha, has numerous buildings. And this is where Mahavira 6th-5th century BC spent 14 vershes, a term that refers to a traditional retreat during monsoons for the monks in Indian religions. This is corroborated in the Kalpasutra, another cherished text in Jainism. However, other than the mention of Nalanda, Jaina texts do not provide further details, nor were they written down for nearly a millennium after Mahavira's death. Like the Buddhist texts, this has raised questions about reliability. and whether the current Nalanda is same as the one in Jaina texts. According to Scarf, though the Buddhist and Jaina texts generate problems with place identification, it is virtually certain that the modern Nalanda is near or the site these texts are referring to. Faxian visit 399412 CE. When Faxian, a Chinese Buddhist pilgrim monk, visited the city of Nalanda, there probably was no university yet. Faxian had come to India to acquire Buddhist texts and spent 10 years in India in the early 5th century, visiting major Buddhist pilgrimage sites, including the Nalanda area. He also wrote a travelogue, which inspired other Chinese and Korean Buddhists to visit India over the centuries. In it, he mentions many Buddhist monasteries and monuments across India. However, he makes no mention of any monastery or university at Nalanda, even though he was looking for Sanskrit texts, and took a large number of them from other parts of India back to China. Combined with the lack of any archaeological discoveries of pre-400 CE monuments in Nalanda, the silence in Faxian's memoir suggests that Nalanda Monastery University did not exist around 400 CE. Foundation 5th century. Nalanda's datable history begins in the 5th century. A seal discovered at the site identifies a monarch named Shakradea Akardea r. c. 415,455 CE as its founder and attributes the foundation of a Sangharama monastery at the site to him. This is corroborated by the Chinese pilgrim Zunzang travelogue. The tradition of formalized Vedic learning helped to inspire the formation of large teaching centers, such as Nalanda, Takshashila, and Vikramashila. In the Indian tradition and texts, kings were called by many epithets and names. Scholars such as Andrea Pinckney and Hartmut Scarf conclude that Shakradea is same as Kumaragupta I. He was one of the kings in the Hindu dynasty of the Guptas. Further numismatic evidence discovered at Nalanda corroborate that Kumaragupta was the founder patron of the Nalanda Monastery University. His successors, Buddhagupta, Tathagatagupta, Baladitya, and Vaira, later extended and expanded the institution by building additional monasteries and temples. Nalanda thus flourished through the 5th and 6th centuries under the Guptas. These Gupta-era contributions to Nalanda are corroborated by the numerous Buddhist and Hindu seals, artwork, iconography, and inscriptions discovered at Nalanda, which are in the Gupta style and Gupta-era scripts. During this period, the Gupta kings were not the only patrons of Nalanda. They reflect a broad and religiously diverse community of supporters. It is remarkable, states Scarf, that many donors were not Buddhists. The emblems on their seals show Lakshmi, Ganesha, Shivalinga, and Durga. Rulers in northeast India bequeathed villages to help fund Nalanda. The king of Sumatra contributed villages for the monastery's endowment. A special fund was also established to support scholars from China. Post-Gupta dynasty, 550–750 CE. After the decline of the Guptas, the most notable patron of the Nalanda Mahavihara was Harsha, known as Lydia in some Buddhist records. He was a 7th century emperor with the capital at Kanai Kanyakubja. According to Zunzang, Harsha was a 3rd-generation Hindu king from the Vaishya caste, who built majestic Buddhist viharas, as well as 3 temples, Buddha, Surya, and Shiva, all of the same size. He states c. 637 CE, a long succession of kings had built up Nalanda, till the whole is truly marvelous to behold. In accordance with ancient Indian traditions of supporting temples and monasteries, inscriptions found at Nalanda suggest that it received gifts, including grants of villages by kings to support its work. Harsha himself granted 100 villages and directed 200 households from each of these villages to supply the institution's monks with requisite daily supplies, such as of rice, butter, and milk. This supported over 1,500 faculty and 10,000 student monks at Nalanda. These numbers, however, may be exaggerated. They are inconsistent with the much lower numbers, over 3,000, given by Yijing, another Chinese pilgrim who visited Nalanda a few decades later. According to Asher, while the excavated Nalanda site is large and the number of viharas so far found are impressive, they simply cannot support 10,000 or more student monks. The total number of known rooms and their small size is such that either the number of monks must have been far less than Xunzang's claims, or the Nalanda site was many times larger than numerous excavations have so far discovered, and what Xunzang describes. Xunzang's visit 6306-3 CE. Xunzang traveled around India between 630 and 643 CE, visiting Nalanda in 637 and 642, spending a total of around 2 years at the monastery. He was warmly welcomed in Nalanda, where he received the Indian name of Mokshadeva, and studied under the guidance of Shilabhadra, the venerable head of the institution at the time. He believed that the aim of his arduous overland journey to India had been achieved, as in Shilabhadra he had at last found an incomparable teacher to instruct him in Yogacara, a school of thought that had then only partially been transmitted to China. Besides Buddhist studies, the monk also attended courses in grammar, logic, and Sanskrit, and later also lectured at the Mahavihara. In the detailed account of his stay at Nalanda, the pilgrim describes the view out of the window of his quarters thus. Moreover, the whole establishment is surrounded by a brick wall, which encloses the entire convent from without. One gate opens into the great college, from which are separated 8 other halls, standing in the middle of the Sangharama. In the 30 years following Xunzang's return, no fewer than 11 travelers from China and Korea are known to have visited Nalanda, including the monk Yijing. Unlike Faxian and Xunzang, Yijing followed the sea route around Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. He arrived in 673 CE and stayed in India for 14 years, 10 of which he spent at the Nalanda Mahavihara. When he returned to China in 695, he had with him 400 Sanskrit texts and 300 grains of Buddha relics which were subsequently translated in China. Unlike Xunzang, who also described the geography and culture of 7th century India, Yijing's account primarily concentrates on the practice of Buddhism in India, and detailed descriptions of the customs, rules, and regulations of the monks at the monastery. In his chronicle, Yijing notes that revenues from 200 villages, as opposed to 100 in Xunzang's time, had been assigned toward the maintenance of Nalanda. He described there being 8 vihara with as many as 300 cells. According to him, Nalanda Monastery has numerous daily Nikaya procedures and rules for the monks. He gives many examples. In one subsection he explains that the monastery has 10 great pools. The morning begins with the Ghanta bell being rung. Monks take their bathing sheets and go to one of these pools. They bathe with their underwear on, then get out slowly to avoid disturbing anyone else. They wipe their bodies, then wrap this 5-foot-long and 1.5-foot-wide sheet around the waist, change their clothes with this wrap in place. Then rinse, wring and dry the sheet. The entire procedure, says Yijing, is explained in the Buddhist Nikaya procedures. The day must begin with bathing, but bathing after meals is forbidden. The Nalanda Nikaya has many such daily procedures and rituals set out for the monks to follow. Korean and Tibetan pilgrims. In addition to Chinese pilgrims, Buddhist pilgrims from Korea also visited India about the same time as Xunzang and Yingji. The Chinese travelogues about India became known in the 19th century and have been well published. After mid-20th century, the Korean pilgrim journeys have come to light. For example, monks such as Kyam-ik began visiting Indian monasteries by the mid-6th century. They too carried Indian texts and translated them, producing 70 to Chuan of translated texts. In the mid-7th century, the Silla Korean monk Hyeon-jo visited and stayed at several Indian monasteries, including 3 years at Nalanda. His visit, corroborated by Yingji, He sent his students Hai Ryan and Hyan Gak to Nalanda for studies. The latter died at Nalanda. They adopted Indian names to interact with the fellow students. For example, Hai Ryan was known as Prajanarman, and it is this name that is found in the records. According to Korean records, monks visited India through the 9th century. Despite arduous travel challenges, to study at various monasteries, and Nalanda was the most revered. In and after the 7th century, Tibetan monks such as Thonmi Sambodha came to Nalanda and other Indian monasteries to study not only Buddhism, but Sanskrit language, grammar, and other subjects. Sambodha is credited with applying the principles of Sanskrit and its grammar to remodel Tibetan language and its script. It was after Sambodha's first return from Nalanda that the Tibetan king adopted Buddhism and committed to making it the religion of his people. Tibetan monks lived closer to Nepal, Sikkim, and eastern India, with simpler travel itineraries than the Koreans and others. Tibetans continued to visit Magadha during the Pala era, and beyond through the 14th century, thereby participated in the crucible of ideas at Nalanda and other monasteries in Bihar and Bengal. However, after the 8th century, it was the esoteric Mandala and deities-driven Vajrayana Buddhism that increasingly dominated the exchange. Pala dynasty 750-1200 CE. The Palas established themselves in eastern regions of India in mid-8th century and reigned until the last quarter of the 12th century. They were a Buddhist dynasty. However, under the Palas, the traditional Mahayana Buddhism of Nalanda that inspired East Asian pilgrims such as Zunzang was superseded by the then newly emerging Vajrayana tradition, a Tantra-imbibed, Eros and deity-inclusive esoteric version of Buddhism. Nalanda continued to get support from the Palas, but they subscribed to Vajrayana Buddhism. And they were prolific builders of new monasteries on Vajrayana Mandala ideas such as those at Jagadala, Odantapura, Somapura, and Vikramashal. Odantapura was founded by Gopala, the progenitor of the royal line, only 9.7 kilometers 6 mi from Nalanda. These competing monasteries, some just a few kilometers away from Nalanda, likely drew away a number of learned monks from Nalanda. Inscriptions, literary evidence, seals, and ruined artwork excavated at the Nalanda site suggest that Nalanda remained active and continued to thrive under the Palas. Kings, Dharmapala and Devapala were active patrons. A number of 9th century metallic statues containing references to Devapala have been found in its ruins, as well as two notable inscriptions. The first, a copper plate inscription unearthed at Nalanda, details an endowment by the Shailendra king Balakutradeva of Suvarnadvipa, Sumatra, and modern-day Indonesia. This Srivijayan king, attracted by the manifold excellences of Nalanda, had built a monastery there, and had requested Devapala to grant the revenue of 5 villages for its upkeep, a request which was granted. The Gosrawan inscription is the other inscription from Devapala's time, and it mentions that he received and patronized a bhikkhu named Viradeva, who had studied all the Vedas in his youth, and who was later elected the head of Nalanda. His account states that the destruction of Nalanda was not an accident or misunderstanding, but a part of the widespread destruction of Buddhist monasteries and monuments, including a destruction of Bodh Gaya. The vast manuscript libraries of Magadha had been mostly lost. Other Tibetan monks and he had shifted to Nepal as the place to study, copy, and move manuscripts to Tibet. According to his account, the Turushka Karluk Turk conquest extended from about 1193 to 1205. The destruction was systematic, with Turushka soldiers razing a monastery to the ground and throwing the stones into Ganges River, states Roerich. The fear of persecution was strong in the 1230s, and his colleagues dissuaded him from going to Magadha. According to George Roerich, his Chag Lo Ca but chose Raji Dpal, Dharmas Vaman account conveys something of the anxiety of the Buddhist community of those days. Chapter 10 of Dharmasvaman's biography describes Nalanda in c. 1235 CE. Dharmasvaman found it largely damaged and deserted. Despite the perils, some had regathered and resumed the scholastic activities in Nalanda, but at a vastly smaller scale, and with donations from a wealthy Brahmin layperson named Jayadeva. His account states, there resided a venerable and learned monk, who was more than 90 years old, the Guru and Mahapandita Rahula. Raja Buddhasena of Magadha honored this Guru and 4 other Panditas, and about 70 venerable ones monks. Dharmasvaman translator, George Roerich. While he stayed there for 6 months under the tutelage of Rahula Shribhadra, Dharmasvaman makes no mention of the legendary library of Nalanda, which possibly did not survive the initial wave of Turco-Afghan attacks. He also states that some structures had survived, with 80 small viharas, built of bricks, and many left undamaged, but there was absolutely no one to look after them. He recites the arrest of their patron and lay supporter Jayadeva by Muslim soldiers who threatened to kill him for supporting the monks of Nalanda. Jayadeva sends them a message that the Turushka soldiers are sure to kill Guru Rahula and his disciples, and they should flee. Dharmasvaman also provides an eyewitness account of an attack on the derelict Mahavihara by the Muslim soldiers stationed at nearby Odantapura, now Bihar Sharif, which had been turned into a military headquarters. Only the Tibetan and his nonagenarian instructor stayed behind and hid themselves while the rest of the monks fled. Another Tibetan source is that of Lama Taranatha, but this is from the late 16th century, and it is unclear what its sources were. The Taranatha account about Buddhism in India repeats the legendary accounts of Nalanda from the Buddha and Ashoka periods, found in Zunzang and other sources, then shifts to centuries of the 2nd millennium. It describes Islamic raids in 12th century India, states that whole of Magadha fell to the Turushka Turks, a common term for Muslims in historic Indic and Tibetan texts. Their armies, asserts Taranatha, destroyed Odantapuri as well as Vikramashal. Given the hundreds of years of gap between the events and Taranatha's account, and no clear chain of sources within the Tibetan tradition of record-keeping, its reliability is questionable. Legendary accounts. Tibetan texts such as 18th-century work named Pag Sam Janzang and 16th-17th century Taranatha's account include fictional Tibetan legends. These include stories such as a king Singalaraja had brought all Hindus and Tauruscus Muslims up to Delhi under his control, and converted from Brahmanism to Buddhism under the influence of his queen, and he restoring the monasteries. Others state that a southern king built thousands of monasteries and temples. Again, Muslim robbers murdered this king. Thereafter, Nalanda was repaired by Mudita Bhadra, and a minister named Kukatasida erected a temple there. Citation needed. One popular story describes the tale of 2 angry Tirthika Brahmanical monks, who gained magical powers by tantric siddha, spread ashes that erupt a fire that destroyed one of Nalanda's 3 libraries, Ratnadahai. But magical water poured out of a manuscript that prevented damage, and learned Buddhist monks rewrote the texts that were damaged. However, there is no evidence for the existence of such a king or sultan, minister, Muslim robbers. Thousands of Buddhist monuments built in India between the 13th and 19th century, or of any significant Nalanda repairs in or after the 13th century. Continued influence. Johann Elverskog, a scholar of religious studies and history, states that it is incorrect to say Nalanda's end was sudden and complete by about 1202, because it continued to have some students well into the 13th century. Elverskog, relying on Arthur Waley's 1932 paper, states that this is confirmed by the fact a monk ordained in 13th century Nalanda traveled to the court of Kublai Khan. He adds that it is wrong to say that Buddhism ended in India in the 13th or 14th century or earlier, because Buddha Dharma survived in India at least until the 17th century. Impact of its destruction and influence on Tibetan Buddhist tradition. After the Islamic conquest, the destruction and the demise of Nalanda, other monasteries and Buddhist culture from the plains of Bihar and Bengal, the brand memory of Nalanda remained the most revered in Tibet. The last throne holder of Nalanda, Shakyashri Bhadra of Kashmir, fled to Tibet in 1204 at the invitation of the Tibetan translator Tropu Lotsawa Kro, Fulo Ca Bu Byams Pa Dpal. Some of the surviving Nalanda books were taken by fleeing monks to Tibet. He took with him several Indian masters, Shugatar, an expert in Madhyamaka and Prajpramit, Jayadatta Vinaya, Vibhta grammar and Abhidharma, Dhanala logic, Sagar Kandavikara, Jyagupta books of Maitreya, Bodhi, Bhattacharya Vatra, and Klakandra Klakakra. In 1351, Tibetans committed to recreating a monastery in the heart of Tibet, staffing it with monk scholars from diverse Buddhist schools, and name it the Nalanda Monastery in the honor of the ancient Nalanda. According to the Blue Annals, this institution emerged north of Lhasa in 1436. Through the efforts of Rongten Ma Seng, then expanded in the 15th century. It is now called the Tibetan Nalanda, to distinguish it from this site. Tibetan Buddhist tradition is regarded to be a continuation of the Nalanda tradition. The Dalai Lama states Tibetan Buddhism is not an invention of the Tibetans. Rather, it is quite clear that it derives from the pure lineage of the tradition of the Nalanda monastery. The master Nagarjuna hailed from this institution, as did many other important philosophers and logicians. The Dalai Lama refers to himself as a follower of the lineage of the 17 Nalanda masters. An Astasahaska Prajnaparamita Sutra manuscript preserved at the Sething Monastery has superbly painted and well-preserved wooden covers and 139 leaves. According to its colophon, it was donated by the mother of the great Pandita, Sri Asoka, in the second year of the reign of King Surapala, at the very end of the 11th century. Nalanda still continued to operate into the 14th century as the Indian monk. Dinabhadra was said to have been a monk at Nalanda prior to his travels in East Asia. Under the East India Company and British Empire 1800-1947. After its decline, Nalanda was largely forgotten until Francis Buchanan Hamilton surveyed the site in 18,111,812. After locals in the vicinity drew his attention to some Buddhist and Brahmanical images and ruins in the area. He, however, did not associate the mounds of earth and debris with famed Nalanda. That link was established by Major Markham Kitto in 1847. Alexander Cunningham and the newly formed Archaeological Survey of India conducted an official survey in 18,611,862. Systematic excavation of the ruins by the ASI did not begin until 1915 and ended in 1937. The first four excavations were led by Spooner between 1915 and 1919. The next two were led by Sastry in 1920 and 1921. The next 7 seasons of archaeological excavations through 1928 were led by Page. These efforts were not merely digging, observation, and cataloging of discoveries. They included conservation, restoration and changes to the site, such as drainage to prevent damage to unearthed floors. After 1928, Kuraishi led 2 seasons of excavations. Chandra led the next 4. The last season was led by Ghosh, but the excavations were abbreviated in 1937 for financial reasons and budget cuts. Chandra and final ASI team leaders noted that the long row of monasteries extend further into the modern village of Bargaon, and the extent of entire monastic establishment can only be determined by future excavations. Post-independence Post 1947. Post-independence, the second round of excavation and restoration took place between 1974 and 1982. In 1951, the Nava Nalanda Mahavihara New Nalanda Mahavihara a modern center for Pali and Buddhism in the spirit of the ancient institution, was founded by the government of Bihar near Nalanda's ruins at the suggestion of Rajendra Prasad, India's first president. It was deemed to be a university in 2006. September 1, 2014 saw the commencement of the first academic year of a modern Nalanda University, with 15 students, in nearby Rajgir. Nalanda University, also known as Nalanda International University, is an international and research-intensive university located in the historical city of Rajgir in Bihar, India. It was established by an Act of Parliament to emulate the famous ancient university of Nalanda, which functioned between the 5th and 13th centuries. The idea to resurrect Nalanda University was endorsed in 2007 at the East Asia Summit, represented mostly by Asian countries including China, Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, and Vietnam, apart from Australia and New Zealand. And as such, the university is seen as one of the flagship projects of the Government of India. It has been designated as an institution of national importance by the Parliament and began its first academic session on September 1, 2014. Initially set up with temporary facilities in Rajgir, a modern campus spanning over 160 hectares 400 acres, is expected to be finished by 2020. This campus, upon completion, will be the largest of its kind in India and one of the largest in Asia. The Mahavihara, while its excavated ruins today only occupy an area of around 488 by 244 meters 1600 by 800 feet, or roughly 12 hectares. Nalanda Mahavihara occupied a far greater area in medieval times. The subjects taught at Nalanda covered every field of learning, and it attracted pupils and scholars from Korea, Japan, China, Tibet, Indonesia, Persia, and Turkey. The university. At its peak, the school attracted scholars and students from near and far, with some traveling from Tibet, China, Korea, and Central Asia. The highly formalized methods of Shamanic studies helped the establishment of large teaching institutions such as Takshashila, Nalanda, and Vikramashila, which are often characterized as India's early universities. Archaeological evidence also notes contact with the Shailendra dynasty of Indonesia, one of whose kings built a monastery in the complex. Nalanda flourished under the patronage of the Gupta Empire in the 5th and 6th centuries, and later under Harsha, the emperor of Kannauj. The liberal cultural traditions inherited from the Gupta age resulted in a period of growth and prosperity until the 9th century CE. The subsequent centuries were a time of gradual decline, a period during which the tantric developments of Buddhism became most pronounced in eastern India under the Pala Empire. Much of our knowledge of Nalanda comes from the writings of pilgrim monks from Asia, such as Zunzang and Yijing, who traveled to the Mahavihara in the 7th century CE. Vincent Smith remarked that a detailed history of Nalanda would be a history of Mahayanist Buddhism. Many of the names listed by Zunzang in his travelogue as alumni of Nalanda are the names of those who developed the overall philosophy of Mahayana. All students at Nalanda studied Mahayana, as well as the texts of the 18 Hinayana sects of Buddhism. Their curriculum also included other subjects, such as the Vedas, logic, Sanskrit grammar, medicine, and Samkhya. Nalanda was destroyed 3 times, but was rebuilt only twice. Citation needed: it was ransacked and destroyed by an army of the Mamluk dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate under Bakhtiyar Khalji in c. 1202 CE, while some sources note that the Mahavihara continued to function in a makeshift fashion after this attack. It was eventually abandoned altogether and forgotten until the 19th century, when the site was surveyed and preliminary excavations were conducted by the Archaeological Survey of India. Systematic excavations commenced in 1915, which unearthed 11 monasteries and 6 brick temples neatly arranged on grounds 12 hectares 30 acres in area. A trove of sculptures, coins, seals, and inscriptions have also been discovered in the ruins. many of which are on display in the Nalanda Archaeological Museum, situated nearby. Nalanda is now a notable tourist destination and a part of the Buddhist tourism circuit. On November 25, 2010, the Indian government, through an Act of Parliament, resurrected the ancient university through the Nalanda University Bill, with which they chose to create a new and unrelated Nalanda University relatively nearby. It has been designated as an international university of national importance, and has accordingly been subject to intense government oversight, with both of its past chancellors explicitly citing government actions for them, leaving their post and courses being shut down due to members of the ruling party disapproving of them. The library. It is evident from the large numbers of texts that Yijing carried back with him after his 10-year residence at Nalanda, that the Mahavihara must have featured a well-equipped library. Traditional Tibetan sources mention the existence of a great library at Nalanda named Dharma Ganja Piety Mart, which comprised 3 large multi-storied buildings: the Ratnasagara Ocean of Jewels, the Ratnadahai Sea of Jewels, and the Ratnaranjika Jewel-adorned. Ratnadahai was 9 stories high and housed the most sacred manuscripts, including the Prajnaparamita Sutra and the Guhya Samaja. The exact number of volumes in the Nalanda library is not known, but it is estimated to have been in the hundreds of thousands. When a Buddhist scholar at Nalanda died, his manuscripts were added to the library collection. The library not only collected religious manuscripts, but also had texts on such subjects as grammar, logic, literature, astrology, astronomy, and medicine. The Nalanda library must have had a classification scheme which was possibly based on a text classification scheme developed by the Sanskrit linguist, Panini. Buddhist texts were most likely divided into 3 classes based on the Tripitaka's 3 main divisions, the Vinaya, Sutra, and the Abhidhamma. Curriculum. In his biography of Xuanzang, Hui Li states that all the students of Nalanda studied the great vehicle Mahayana, as well as the works of the 18 Nikaya traditions of Buddhism. In addition to these, they studied other subjects such as the Vedas, Hatuvadi logic, Shabdavidya grammar and philology, Chikitsavidya medicine, the works on magic, the Atharvaveda, and Samkhya. According to Fraser, the Vedic studies included Vedic texts and ritual, but also the different theoretical disciplines associated with the limbs or the sciences of the Vedas, which included disciplines such as linguistics, law, astronomy, and reasoning. Xuanzang himself studied a number of these subjects at Nalanda under Shilabhadra and others. Besides theology and philosophy, frequent debates and discussions necessitated competence in logic. A student at the Mahavihara had to be well versed in the systems of logic associated with all the different schools of thought of the time, as he was expected to defend Buddhist systems against the others. Other subjects believed to have been taught at Nalanda include law, astronomy, and city planning. Tibetan tradition holds that there were 4 doxographies, Standard Tibetan, Grub Emtha, which were taught at Nalanda: Sarvastivada, Vaibhashika, Sarvastivada Sautrantika, Madhyamaka, the Mahayana philosophy of Nagarjuna, Kittamatra, the Mahayana philosophy of Asanga, and Vasubandhu. In the 7th century, Xuanzang recorded the number of teachers at Nalanda as being around 1,510. Of these, approximately 1,000 were able to explain 20 collections of sutras and shastras. 500 were able to explain 30 collections, and only 10 teachers were able to explain 50 collections. Xuanzang was among the few who were able to explain 50 collections or more. At this time, only the abbot Shilabhadra had studied all the major collections of sutras and shastras at Nalanda. Administration. The Chinese monk Yijing wrote that matters of discussion and administration at Nalanda would require assembly and consensus on decisions by all those at the assembly, as well as resident monks. If monks had some business, they would assemble to discuss the matter. Then they ordered the officer, Virapla, to circulate and report the matter to the resident monks one by one, with folded hands. With the objection of a single monk, it would not pass. There was no use of beating or thumping to announce his case. In case a monk did something without consent of all the residents, he would be forced to leave the monastery. If there was a difference of opinion on a certain issue, they would give reason to convince the other group. No force or coercion was used to convince. Xuanzang also noted, the lives of all these virtuous men were naturally governed by habits of the most solemn and strictest kind. Thus, in the 700 years of the monastery's existence, no man has ever contravened the rules of the discipline. The king showers it with the signs of his respect and veneration, and has assigned the revenue from 100 cities to pay for the maintenance of the religious influence on Buddhism. A vast amount of what came to comprise Tibetan Buddhism, both its Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, stems from the teachers and traditions at Nalanda. Shantarakshita, who pioneered the propagation of Buddhism in Tibet in the 8th century, was a scholar of Nalanda. He was invited by the Tibetan king, Kri Shran Duzan, and established the monastery at Samai, serving as its first abbot. He and his disciple Kamalashala, who was also of Nalanda, essentially taught Tibetans how to do philosophy. Padmasambhava, who was also invited from Nalanda Mahavihara by the king in 747 CE, is credited as a founder of Tibetan Buddhism. The scholar Dharmakirti c. 7th century, one of the Buddhist founders of Indian philosophical logic, as well as one of the primary theorists of Buddhist atomism, taught at Nalanda. Other forms of Buddhism, such as the Mahayana Buddhism, followed in Vietnam. China, Korea and Japan flourished within the walls of the ancient school. A number of scholars have associated some Mahayana texts, such as the Shurangama Sutra, an important sutra in East Asian Buddhism, with the Buddhist tradition at Nalanda. Ron Epstein also notes that the general doctrinal position of the sutra does indeed correspond to what is known about the Buddhist teachings at Nalanda. Several Buddhist institutions overseas have chosen to call themselves Nalanda to acknowledge Nalanda's influence. These include Nalanda Buddhist Society in Malaysia and Nalanda College, Colombo, Sri Lanka, Nalanda Buddhist Education Foundation, Indonesia, Nalanda Buddhist Institute, Bhutan. World Heritage Sites recognition. The Nalanda Mahavihara is recognized as a World Heritage Site by the UNESCO in 2016. Historical figures associated with Nalanda. Traditional sources state that Nalanda was visited by both Mahavira and the Buddha in c. 6th and 5th century BC. It is also the place of birth and nirvana of Shariputra, one of the famous disciples of Buddha. Other historical figures associated with Nalanda include Aryabhata, Aryadeva, student of Nagarjuna, Asanga, proponent of the Yogacarya school, Atisha, Mahayana and Vajrayana scholar, Buddhaguya, Vajrayana Buddhist monk and scholar, Chandrakirti, student of Nagarjuna, Kandragaman, Dharmakirti, logician, Dharmapala, Dinabhadra, Dignaga, founder of Buddhist logic, Kamalala, abbot of Nalanda, Maitrapada, Indian Buddhist Mahasiddha, Nagarjuna, formalizer of the concept of shunyata, Naropa, student of Tilopa and teacher of Marpa, Tarakita, founder of Yagkramjayamika, Shantadeva, composer of the Bodhisattva Karya, Shilabhadra, the teacher of Xuanzang, Vajrabhati, 7th-8th century Indian esoteric monk, and one of the patriarchs of Chinese esoteric Buddhism and Shingon Buddhism. Vasubandhu, brother of Asanga. Xuanzang, Chinese Buddhist traveler. Yijing, Chinese Buddhist traveler. Excavated remains. After its decline, Nalanda was largely forgotten until Francis Buchanan Hamilton surveyed the site in 18,111,812. After locals in the vicinity drew his attention to a vast complex of ruins in the area. He, however, did not associate the mounds of earth and debris with famed Nalanda. That link was established by Major Markham Kitto in 1847. Alexander Cunningham and the newly formed Archaeological Survey of India conducted an official survey in 18,611,862. Systematic excavation of the ruins by the ASI did not begin until 1915 and ended in 1937. The second round of excavation and restoration took place between 1974 and 1982. The remains of Nalanda today extend some 488 meters 1600 f north to south and around 244 meters 800 f east to west. Excavations have revealed 11 monasteries, also known as Vihara, and 6 major brick temples arranged in an ordered layout. A 30 meters 100 f wide passage runs from north to south, with the temples to its west and the monasteries to its east. Most structures show evidence of multiple periods of construction, with new buildings being raised atop the ruins of old ones. Many of the buildings also display signs of damage by fire, on at least one occasion. The map gives the layout of the excavated structures. Temple 3 in the south was the most imposing structure. Susan Huntington and Bhaskara Misra, scholars of Indian architecture and arts, state Temple 2 as a Hindu temple. However, Hu Fuakla, a scholar of Buddhist architecture, questions this purely Hindu affiliation, stating that it could be a temple based on the mandala principles, and one reflecting Hindu-Buddhist syncretism of the 8th to 12th century, when Shaiva and Shakti deities were integrated into Vajrayana Buddhism. The site of Temple No. 13 features a brick-made smelting furnace with 4 chambers. The discovery of burnt metal and slag suggests that it was used to cast metallic objects. To the north of Temple 13 are remains of Temple No. 14. An enormous image of the Buddha was discovered here. The image's pedestal features fragments of the only surviving exhibit of mural painting at Nalanda. To the east of Temple 2 lie the remains of Sarai Temple and the recently excavated Sarai Mount. This multi-storied Buddhist temple with many stupas and shrines was enclosed by a massive wall enclosure. The remains in the sanctum suggest that the Buddha statue was around 24 meters 80 f high. Numerous sculptures, as well as many murals, copper plates, artworks, inscriptions, seals, coins, plaques, potteries, and works in stone, bronze, stucco, and terracotta have been unearthed within the ruins of Nalanda. The Buddhist sculptures discovered notably include those of the Buddha in different postures, Avalokiteshvara, Jambala Manjushri, Arichi, and Tara. Brahmanical idols of Vishnu, Shiva, Parvati, Ganesha, Mahishasura, Mardini, and Surya have also been found in the ruins. A black Buddha temple termed by locals as the Telia Bhairav, Tel refers to use of oil, is near Temple 14 which has an ancient large black Buddha image in Bhumaspara Mudra. This the same temple termed Baithik Bhairab in Cunningham's 186,160 ASI report. Surviving Nalanda manuscripts. Fleeing monks took some of the Nalanda manuscripts. A few of them have survived and are preserved in collections such as those at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Folios from Adaran Asamgra, circa 1075. Asia Society. This Ashtasahaska Prajnaparamita manuscript records, in Sanskrit and Tibetan, the history of the manuscript from its creation at the famous Nalanda Monastery in India, through its use in Tibet by the compiler of the first Tibetan canon of Buddhism, Bhutan. Yarling Museum, Sitang from the Ankirula Kong Monastery. Astasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sanskrit palm leaf manuscript, with 139 leaves and painted wooden covers. According to the Colophon, this manuscript was donated by the mother of the great Pandita, Sri Asoka, in the second year of the reign of King Surapala at end of the 11th century. Nalanda inscriptions. A number of inscriptions were found during the excavation, which are now preserved in the Nalanda Museum. These include Sanof, a minister of Yashovarman, donated to the temple built by King Baladitya. 8th century CE, basalt slab found in Monastery 1. Temple 12, 13, 14. Face the monasteries and face east. With the exception of those designated 1A and 1B, the monasteries all face west, with drains emptying out in the east, and staircases positioned in the southwest corner of the buildings. Temple 2 was to the east. All the monasteries at Nalanda are very similar in layout and general appearance. Their plan involves a rectangular form with a central quadrangular court, which is surrounded by a veranda which, in turn, is bounded by an outer row of cells for the monks, a typical design of Vihara architecture. The central cell facing the entrance leading into the court is a shrine chamber. Its strategic position means that it would have been the first thing that drew the eye when entering the edifice. With the exception of those designated 1A and 1B, the monasteries all face west, with drains emptying out in the east, and staircases positioned in the southwest corner of the buildings. Monastery 1 is considered the oldest and the most important of the monastery group, and shows as many as 9 levels of construction. Its lower monastery is believed to be the one sponsored by Balaputradeva, the Srivijayan king. During the reign of Devapala in the 9th century, see Nalanda copperplate of Devapala. The building was originally at least 2 stories high, and contained a colossal statue of a seated Buddha. Temple number 3, also termed Sariputta Stupa, is the most iconic of Nalanda's structures, with its multiple flights of stairs that lead all the way to the top. The temple was originally a small structure, which was built upon and enlarged by later constructions. Archaeological evidence shows that the final structure was a result of at least 7 successive such accumulations of construction. The 5th of these layered temples is the most interesting and the best preserved, with 4 corner towers, of which 3 have been exposed. The towers, as well as the sides of the stairs, are decorated with exquisite panels of Gupta-era art, depicting a variety of stucco figures, including Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, scenes from the Yataka tales. The temple is surrounded by numerous votive stupas, some of which have been built with bricks inscribed with passages from sacred Buddhist texts. The apex of Temple No. 3 features a shrine chamber which now only contains the pedestal, upon which an immense statue of Buddha must have once rested. According to Win Mong, the stupa was influenced by Gupta architecture, which itself had Kushana-era influences. In a shrine near the bottom of the staircase, a large image of Avalokiteshvara was found, which was eventually moved to the museum. Temple No. 2 notably features 211 sculptured religious and secular panels. These include Shiva, Parvati, Kartikeya, and Gajalakshmi, kinnaras playing musical instruments, various representations of makaras, as well as human couples in amorous postures, as well as scenes of art and of everyday life. Murnavarman constructed a 24-meter-high ADF brass image of Buddha. 7th century CE, basalt slab, found in Sarai Mound. Monk Vipul Srimitra built a monastery. Basalt slab, later half of 12th cent, found in the uppermost level of Monastery 7. Donation of Balaputradeva, the king of Suvarnadvipa of Sailendra dynasty. 860 CE copperplate found by Hirananda Shastri in 1921, the antechamber of Monastery 1 at Nalanda. Tourism. Nalanda is a popular tourist destination in the state, attracting a number of Indian and overseas visitors. It is also an important stop on the Buddhist tourism circuit. Nalanda Archaeological Museum. The Archaeological Survey of India maintains a museum near the ruins for the benefit of visitors. The museum, opened in 1917, exhibits the antiquities that have been unearthed at Nalanda as well as from nearby Rajgir. Out of 13,463 items, only 349 are on display in 4 galleries. Zunzang Memorial Hall. Zhuanzhang Memorial Hall. The Zunzang Memorial Hall is an Indo-Chinese undertaking to honor the famed Buddhist monk and traveler. A relic, comprising a skull bone of the Chinese monk, is on display in the Memorial Hall. Nalanda Multimedia Museum. Another museum adjoining the excavated site is the privately run Nalanda Multimedia Museum. It showcases the history of Nalanda through 3D animation and other multimedia presentations.